Hey everybody, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today, we are going deep into the world of tapeworms in goats.
Specifically.
We've got a couple of excerpts from academic texts about goat parasites and goat medicine, and we're really going to try to get to the bottom of, what are the key things goat owners or people interested in goats should know about tapeworms.
I think this will be interesting because it's like a whole hidden world inside these animals that we don't often think about.
We don't think about.
Yeah.
So before we jump into all the specifics, let's just lay some groundwork. Like, what exactly are tapeworms?
So picture this. You have this flat, ribbon-like creature living in the intestines of a goat.
Okay.
And this creature can grow longer than a school bus in some cases.
What?
And here's the kicker. They don't have a digestive system or a circulatory system or a respiratory system. They absorb all their nutrients directly through their skin.
That's both efficient and terrifying.
It is.
So if you've got this creature living inside your goat, how do you even know that it's there?
So their bodies are made up of these segments called proglottids, and each one of these segments is packed with reproductive organs. And eventually these segments break off and are passed in the goat's droppings.
So you're saying it's all about inspecting goat poop?
It's like a treasure hunt, but the treasure is like a tiny off-white rice-shaped segment.
Okay, I'll pass on that treasure hunt.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of the specifics, because there are different kinds of tapeworms, right?
There are.
Our sources mentioned several, and I think the first one we should talk about is Manitsia expansa. It seems like this is kind of a global superstar
Yes, Manitsia expansa occurs worldwide.
in the world of goat parasites.
And they have a fascinating life cycle. So it starts with the eggs being passed in the goat feces, and then tiny little soil mites called oribated mites eat those eggs.
Okay.
And then the goats, while they're grazing, accidentally ingest these infected mites, and the cycle continues.
So it's like a miniature ecosystem happening right there in the goat's gut.
Yeah.
What kind of impact does that actually have on the goats, though?
So adult goats can usually handle it pretty well, but young goats,
Okay.
if they have a really heavy infection of Manitsia expansa,
Yeah.
they can have serious problems like an intestinal blockage.
Oh, that sounds really bad for a little goat.
Yeah, it can be.
So how do we deal with this Manitsia expansa?
There are several treatments that are effective. Niclosamide,
Okay.
fenbendazole, albendazole,
Okay.
all work, but praziquantel seems to be the most effective.
So praziquantel is like the big gun that you bring out to fight
Yes.
Manitsia expansa.
Yes.
Now, what about Avitelina? That was another one that our sources mentioned, and apparently they like to hang out with Manitsia quite a bit.
Yeah, so Avitelina often occurs alongside Manitsia,
Okay.
and it can even be the dominant type of tapeworm in some regions.
Really?
Yeah, Europe, Africa, Asia. They look a little bit different, though. Avitelina species look more like long ribbons
Okay.
without distinct segmentation.
So you're not looking for those little grains of rice
Yeah,
with Avitelina?
not so much.
Interesting. Okay. So are they any less of a problem than Manitsia?
Actually, infections are often really mild,
Really?
and they can even be asymptomatic. So sometimes there are no symptoms at all.
That's interesting. So if they're not really causing problems, do we even need to worry about treating them?
Well, treatment is still usually recommended,
Yeah.
even if there aren't any obvious symptoms.
Okay.
And there are a variety of anthelmintics that are effective against Avitelina.
Okay.
So you can use narrow-spectrum drugs like niclosamide or broad-spectrum drugs like fenbendazole.
What's the difference between a narrow and a broad spectrum drug?
So a narrow-spectrum drug is like a sniper.
Okay.
It targets a very specific type of parasite.
Okay.
A broad-spectrum drug is more like a grenade. It takes out a wider range of parasites.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's Avitelina. Now, our sources also mention Stalesia globipunctata and its relative Stalesia hepatica, which is the liver tapeworm.
Right. So these two
Yeah.
species prefer different parts of the digestive system.
Okay.
Stalesia globipunctata likes to hang out in the small intestine,
Yeah.
whereas Stalesia hepatica makes its home in the bile duct.
So they're both causing trouble, just in different locations.
Right. And unlike some of the other tapeworms we've talked about,
Yeah.
Stalesia can cause inflammation and diarrhea in goats.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, it's not ideal.
So anything else about Stalevia that we should know?
One thing is that they're more common in tropical and subtropical areas.
Okay.
So depending on where you live, they might not be as big of a concern.
Okay, so we've got a good handle now on the different types of tapeworms and kind of where they like to live in the goat.
Yes.
But how do we even know if a goat has tapeworms in the first place? We've talked about those little segments that look like grains of rice, But are there other signs?
Right, so sometimes there are no obvious signs at all, especially in adult goats.
Okay.
But if a goat has a really heavy infestation of tapeworms, it can cause a range of problems.
Like what?
Diarrhea, reduced weight gain.
Okay.
You might even see a pot-bellied appearance due to bloating.
Oh, wow.
And in severe cases, you might even see constipation or colic.
Colic sounds bad.
Yeah, colic can be very serious.
So if you see any of that, you should definitely be calling the vet.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that young goats
Yeah.
are much more likely to develop serious complications from a tapeworm infection.
So regular checkups for the youngsters.
Yes, very important.
Right. So we've talked about the signs and symptoms now. How do we actually diagnose a tapeworm infection?
So if you suspect that your goat might have tapeworms,
Yeah.
the best thing to do is to take a fecal sample to your veterinarian.
Okay.
They can examine it under a microscope and look for tapeworm eggs.
So that's the best way to know for sure.
Yes, that's the gold standard.
Okay, so let's say we take that fecal sample to the vet. The vet confirms, yep, your goat has tapeworms. What's next?
Well, the good news is that we have a number of different anthelmintics that are effective against tapeworms.
Okay.
Some of the commonly used ones are niclosamide, praziquantel,
Yep.
fabantel,
Okay.
and then there's a class of drugs called the benzimidazoles,
Okay.
which includes mebendazole and fenbendazole.
So those are all different options for treating tapeworms.
Exactly.
And do they specifically target tapeworms, or do they also work on other kinds of parasites?
So some of them are broad spectrum,
Okay.
which means they'll target a range of intestinal parasites, including nematodes.
Which are also a common problem in goats.
Yes, very common.
So you might be able to hit two birds with one stone.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about treatment. What about prevention? Is there anything we can do to keep those pesky tapeworms away in the first place?
That's where it gets a little tricky.
Oh.
Because remember those tiny mites that act as intermediate hosts? They're practically everywhere.
Oh, no.
It's very difficult to control them completely.
Okay.
So the most practical approach is to deworm your goats regularly,
Okay.
especially young goats that are going out to pasture for the first time.
So it's kind of a constant battle.
It is. But with proper management
Yeah.
and vigilance,
Yeah.
we can definitely win the battle.
Okay. So just to quickly recap what we've talked about so far, we've got these different types of tapeworms, Menetia, Avitelina, Stolicia.
Right.
We've talked about their really fascinating and kind of disturbing life cycles.
Yeah.
We've talked about the symptoms that you might see if your goat has a tapeworm infection.
Yes.
And we've talked about the various treatment options that are available.
Right.
And of course, the importance of regular fecal exams and proactive deworming.
Absolutely.
Now, you ready to go a little bit deeper into this world of goat tapeworms?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, let's dive back in.
All right. So we've talked about the impact of tapeworms on a goat's health, but it turns out these parasites can also impact the farmer's wallet.
Oh, no, not their wallets.
Yeah. So imagine you're a farmer and you send your goats off to slaughter.
Okay.
You're hoping for a good return on your investment,
Yeah.
but then some of the livers get condemned
Well,
because of Stylesia hepatica.
oh, from the tapeworms.
Yes, the liver tapeworm.
So even if the goats seem healthy,
Right.
those hidden parasites can cause problems.
Exactly. And it's not just Stylesia hepatica. The fringe tapeworm Thysanosoma actinuites can also cause liver condemnations.
So that's a loss of income for the farmer
Yes.
and a waste of food.
Exactly. It's not just about individual goats being sick. It's about the bigger picture impact on the food chain
Right.
and the livelihoods of farmers.
And could these tapeworms also affect other animals that might prey on goats
Yes,
or scavenge their remains?
definitely.
So, like, could a tapeworm go from a goat to, say, a dog?
Well, not directly, but through a slightly disturbing cycle.
Okay, tell me more.
So take Titinia hydatigena, for example.
Oh.
It uses canins like dogs as their definitive hosts.
Oh.
So that means that the adult tapeworm lives in the dog's intestines.
Gotcha.
But goats and other ruminants and even pigs
Uh-huh.
can become accidental intermediate hosts.
Okay.
So they ingest the tapeworm eggs that are shed by infected dogs.
Okay.
And those eggs can develop into cysts in the goat's body.
Oh, that sounds bad.
Yeah, often in the liver, the mesentery, and the omentum.
Where are those?
Those are the tissues that surround the abdominal organs.
Okay.
So if a dog eats an infected goat, then the cycle continues. Those tapeworm larvae inside the cysts develop into adult tapeworms in the dog's intestines.
Wow, it's like a parasitic merry-go-round.
Right.
How do we break this cycle?
Well, preventing dogs from accessing goat carcasses or offal is really important.
So responsible disposal of animal remains.
Exactly. That's
Mhm.
crucial to break the chain of infection.
Okay, and regular deworming of dogs too, right?
Absolutely. We need to tackle the problem from both sides.
Right.
Preventing infection in the goats and breaking the cycle in the dogs.
Gotcha. So back to those cysts you're talking about in the goat.
Yes.
But besides potentially ending up in a dog's dinner,
Yeah.
do they cause any other problems?
Well, they might not kill the goat outright,
Yeah.
but those cysts can impact the goat's overall health and productivity.
Okay.
And of course, as we mentioned earlier, they can also lead to condemnations at slaughter.
Right. Which is a financial hit for the farmer.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned something earlier about tapeworms and goat abortion.
Yes. So while tapeworms themselves don't typically cause abortion in goats,
Uh-huh.
our sources do highlight a number of other parasites
Okay.
that,
So we're not just talking about tapeworms anymore.
right, we need to widen our scope a bit.
Okay.
One of the main culprits is Toxoplasma gondii,
Okay.
which is a protozoan parasite that can infect a wide range of animals, including goats.
I've heard of toxoplasmosis.
Yes.
Isn't that something that pregnant women need to be careful about?
You're exactly right. Cats are the definitive hosts for Toxoplasma gondii. They shed the parasite's eggs in their feces.
Uh-huh.
Goats can become infected by ingesting those eggs from contaminated food water or soil.
So similar to how they get infected with some tapeworms.
Exactly. Accidental ingestion of parasite eggs from the environment.
Right.
And once a goat is infected with Toxoplasma gondii,
Yeah.
it can have serious consequences,
Like what?
especially for pregnant goats.
Okay.
The parasite can cross the placenta and infect the developing fetus,
Oh, no.
leading to abortion stillbirth or the birth of weak kids.
So it can harm both the mother and the babies?
Yes, unfortunately, there's no cure for toxoplasmosis.
Oh, wow.
So prevention is really important.
So what can we do to prevent it?
Well, minimizing contact between goats and cat feces is crucial.
Okay, so keep those cats away from the goat, food, and water.
Exactly. Proper disposal of any cat litter or feces is essential to prevent environmental contamination.
Gotcha. But you said that Toxoplasma gondii wasn't the only parasite that can cause problems for pregnant goats.
Right. There's another significant culprit called Chlamydophila abortus. Okay.
It's a bacterium that causes enzootic abortion in goats.
Enzootic abortion. What is that?
It's highly contagious,
Oh, no.
and it can spread like wildfire through a herd.
Oh, wow.
It can cause widespread abortion, which leads to significant economic losses for farmers.
So how do goats get infected with this bacterium?
The main route of transmission is through contact with infected abortion material,
Like what?
such as placentas or fetal fluids.
Oh, so if one goat aborts,
Right.
it can easily spread to others.
Exactly. Prompt isolation of any aborting goats and proper disposal of that abortion material are critical for containing outbreaks.
This sounds like a nightmare for goat farmers.
It can be devastating
Ah.
because enzootic abortion not only reduces the number of kids born,
Right.
but it can also cause long-term reproductive problems in infected goats.
So we've got toxoplasmosis and enzootic abortion,
Right.
both caused by different parasites, but both posing a serious threat to pregnant goats.
Yes.
Are there any other culprits we should be aware of? There are a few others mentioned in our sources, including bacteria like Campylobacter listeria and even salmonella,
Like salmonella, like the bacteria that causes food poisoning in humans.
the very same.
Wow. So it can affect goats too?
Yes, salmonella can infect a wide range of animals, including goats.
Huh.
And in pregnant goats, it can lead to abortion or stillbirth.
So this is really highlighting the interconnectedness of animal and human health.
It is, and it really underscores the importance of biosecurity hygiene and regular veterinary care.
Yeah, to protect goats from all these threats.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've learned about the economic impact of tapeworms, their role in a larger parasitic cycle involving other animals,
Right.
and the threat of various parasites to pregnant goats.
Yes.
Is there anything else we should touch on before we move on to our final part?
I think there is one more crucial aspect of parasite control that we need to discuss.
Okay, what's that?
And that's the growing problem of anthelmintic resistance.
Anthelmintic resistance. What is that?
So remember all those different anthelmintic drugs we talked about?
Yeah, all of our weapons against parasites.
Exactly. The problem is that with repeated use of the same drugs, some parasites can develop resistance, meaning that the drugs become less effective at killing them.
So it's like how bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics.
Precisely. It's a classic example of natural selection at work.
So how does that work?
When we use anthelmintics, we're essentially creating an environment that favors the survival of those parasites
Right.
with genetic mutations that make them less susceptible to the drugs.
So the resistant parasites survive
Right.
and reproduce
Yes.
and pass on those resistant genes.
Okay.
And then we end up with a population of parasites that's no longer affected by the drugs.
That's right. And that's a serious concern because it makes controlling these parasitic infections much more challenging.
So what can goat farmers do to minimize the risk of this resistance developing?
Well, one crucial strategy is to avoid unnecessary deworming.
Okay.
Only deworm goats when there's evidence of a parasitic infection.
So don't just deworm for the sake of deworming.
Yes.
Stack at the problem strategic.
Right. And when deworming is necessary,
Yeah.
it's essential to use the right drug at the right dose.
Okay.
And to rotate between different classes of anthelmintic.
To reduce the risk of resistance.
Exactly.
So don't rely on the same drug over and over again.
Right.
Mix things up.
Exactly. And working closely with a veterinarian to develop a comprehensive parasite control plan is always a good idea.
So it's all about being informed and proactive.
Absolutely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the economic impact of tapeworms, the complex interplay between different animals, and the threat of parasites to pregnant goats, and the challenge of anthelmintic resistance.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn even more.
I hope so.
Are you ready to dive into the final part?
I am. Let's do it.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Everyone, I hope you are ready for more, because
I am.
I am too. We've been talking a lot about all these different parasites that can affect goats.
Right.
It's really fascinating and kind of disturbing at the same time.
It is.
But I think it's really important information for goat owners to know.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power when it comes to parasite control.
Exactly. So
Right.
before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something that we touched on earlier, and that's the importance of regular deworming.
Yes, deworming is essential for all livestock
Right.
and even our pets.
But I know that there are some concerns about the development of anthelmintic resistance.
Right.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so anthelmintics are the drugs that we use to kill internal parasites like tapeworms and roundworms. But with repeated use of the same drugs,
Yeah.
some parasites can actually develop resistance.
So it's kind of like how bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics.
Exactly. It's a classic example of natural selection at work.
So how does that work?
Well, when we use anthelmintics,
Yeah.
we're basically selecting for those parasites that have genetic mutations. Okay.
That make them less susceptible to the drugs.
So the ones that survive are the ones that are resistant, and then they reproduce,
Yeah.
and they pass on those resistance genes.
Exactly. And eventually we end up with a population of parasites that's no longer affected by the drugs we're using.
And that makes it a lot harder to control the infections.
It does. It's a serious concern.
So what can goat owners do to prevent this from happening?
Well, one of the most important things is to avoid unnecessary deworming.
Okay.
So only deworm your goats when there's evidence of a parasitic infection.
So don't just deworm for the sake of deworming.
Right.
Gotcha.
And when you do deworm,
Yeah.
it's important to use the right drug at the right dose.
Okay.
And you want to rotate between different classes of anthelmintics.
So mix it up.
Yes.
Don't use the same one all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I always recommend working closely with your veterinarian
Right.
to develop a comprehensive parasite control plan.
That's tailored to your specific herd.
Yes. So it's all about being informed, being proactive,
Yeah.
and working with the experts.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I think we've covered just about everything we can about goat parasites.
I think so.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive,
It has.
and I hope our listeners have learned a lot.
Me too.
And if you're a goat owner out there,
Yes.
please take this information to heart
Yes.
and use it to protect your goats from these parasites.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.